The lights were blinding. I stood backstage at the Digital Defense Expo, gripping the fail-safe drive in my hand like it was the last piece of something I'd worked for. The sound of applause reached me from the main stage, muffled but clear enough. It should have been the moment I was finally recognized, the moment everything I'd built with Harold was seen by the world. But instead, I felt like a ghost. Harold stood there, basking in the spotlight, grinning wide as he rattled off the latest team innovation. My intrusion defense model, the one I designed. But of course it wasn't mine anymore. It was ours. It was his now. I watched the crowd of investors lean forward, eyes locked on Harold, nodding in approval. They saw him, and that was it. Dana, sitting front and center, was smiling, her eyes bright. I couldn't tell if she was proud of him or just proud of herself for being part of the show. But not one person noticed me. Not one person looked at the guy standing in the wings, holding the fail-safe drive that made the whole thing work. Harold went on, talking about our team's hard work and collective vision. He even called out a couple of names of junior developers, people I barely recognized, as if they were key players. No mention of me, no nod to the years I'd put in. Late nights writing code in that shitty little apartment in Queens, with the hum of traffic outside, and nothing but our dreams to keep us going. I'd thought about those nights a lot lately, back when Harold was just some guy with a big mouth and even bigger dreams, and I was the one pulling all-nighters to make those dreams real. He was the one talking to investors, selling a vision of Silverback that was always bigger than it was. But I didn't mind. I'd never minded. I believed in what we were building, believed in him too. At least, I used to. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen as essential. It wasn't just at the expo, it had been happening for a while. Harold started calling me senior developer instead of co-founder, like it was some title meant to make me feel like I was still important, when I was barely a footnote in the story anymore. I looked at him up there, delivering the same pitch he'd given 1,000 times, and I realized he'd been erasing me, piece by piece. It wasn't just the job anymore, it was Dana too. She was always so supportive, so on board with whatever Harold decided. Even when I raised concerns about how we were losing our edge, or how I needed more recognition, she brushed it off. The look she gave me when we were alone said it all. You're not important. Not to me. The applause died down, and Harold gestured to the team like some proud ringmaster, as if this was all a group effort. Maybe for him, it was. But for me, it was the moment I realized they didn't need me anymore. I turned around, still holding the drive, but now it felt heavy, useless. I wanted to throw it against the wall, but I didn't. I just turned and walked into the shadows, out of view, away from the noise, away from the people who didn't even know I was gone. I could have made a scene. I could have barged onto that stage and thrown it in their faces. Told them who really made this company, who kept it alive, while Harold made deals and Dana pretended she was the mastermind. But I didn't. I didn't need to. Not anymore. I'd already been erased. It was just another Tuesday when the email hit my inbox. Please welcome Elaine Kent as Chief Strategy Officer. Elaine Kent, Harold's ex-wife. The woman who'd nearly run Silverback into the ground years ago with her toxic attitude, her endless scheming, and her knack for destroying any shred of goodwill in a room. I couldn't believe what I was reading, and the fact that I hadn't been told about it beforehand, that was the final slap in the face. Dana's response when I confronted her was nothing short of predictable. It wasn't my decision, Rick. It came from the board, out of my hands. I hated how she looked at me when she said it, like I was the one being unreasonable. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just nodded, a sharp, cold nod. Right. Out of your hands. I knew something was off when Elaine started showing up in my project meetings. At first I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. She'd wander in, take notes, ask vague questions, then leave with some wordy, pompous comment about rethinking the approach. Every time, it felt like a slow, torturous erosion of everything I had built. Then she started doing it more often. She'd stand at the back, arms crossed, quietly watching, while I went over architectural plans, security measures, anything that had my name on it. She'd pull me aside after, suggesting we pivot on this feature or explore new synergies in that one. Her ideas were vague, meaningless really, just strategic fluff wrapped up in buzzwords that didn't mean anything to anyone who actually knew what they were talking about. But the board, they loved it. One day, she took one of my architectural drafts, the one I had spent days perfecting, and repackaged it. The next thing I knew, it was being presented as a groundbreaking innovation at the all hands. The buzzword parade was in full swing. Scalable, future-proof, disruptive. It was all nonsense. They didn't even recognize that it was my work. And Harold, he sat there, silent, not a word. He didn't correct her, didn't step in to say that the core concept was mine. He just let it happen. I thought maybe he had just lost his edge. Maybe he didn't care anymore. But the truth was worse. He was complicit. And Dana, she was right there, nodding along, smiling at Elaine like she was some kind of genius. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just standing by. She was backing her. That was when it hit me. Dana wasn't just complicit in the erasure of me from the company. She was leading it. I had spent years trusting her, thinking she was my partner in this. But now, I could see the truth. She'd picked sides long ago, and I wasn't on it. The realization was cold. I'd built this company from nothing, with my hands, with my code, with my sleepless nights. And now, it was all slipping away, faster than I could keep up with. It wasn't just the work either. It was the way they talked to me now, the way they looked at me. Like I was yesterday's news, a relic. I went back to my desk that day, but nothing felt the same. I couldn't look at the monitors, couldn't look at the code. All I could see was Elaine's smile, Dana's quiet support, and Harold sitting there with nothing to say. Elaine's revamp of the system wasn't just a bad idea. It was a train wreck waiting to happen. I had seen the initial drafts. She was taking my old proposals, ideas I'd put on hold because they weren't ready, and twisting them into something unrecognizable. Features I'd built to work together were being restructured as isolated components, like trying to fit puzzle pieces from different boxes into one picture. When I raised concerns, she dismissed them with that same patronizing smile, like I was too caught up in the details. "We're thinking bigger, Rick," she'd said. "This is how we scale." It wasn't scaling, it was collapsing. But I wasn't just ignored, I was actively sidelined. The board signed off, Dana backed her, and I was left to watch as they dug a deeper hole. 2 weeks later, it all came crashing down. A Fortune 100 client, a major player we'd spent years courting, almost suffered a breach, a massive breach. The system I'd built, the one Elaine had botched, was showing cracks, and they were big enough to drive a truck through. I got the call at 2:30 a.m. I didn't even have to check the ID. I knew who it was. The CTO was already frantic. "Rick, we need you, now." I threw on clothes, grabbed my phone, and hit the road. The whole time, I kept thinking, this is it. This is what they've done to us. For the next 5 weeks, I lived in the server room. The cot in the corner was my bed, my office, my prison. I worked straight through, barely stopping to eat. Every line of code I rewrote, every security patch I applied, it felt like fighting a losing battle. And the whole time, I never heard a word from Dana. Not one text to check in, not one email asking how it was going. Elaine and Dana, though, they were out at fundraisers. They were being hailed as visionaries by the same investors who had no idea what was actually happening behind the scenes. They smiled for the cameras, signed checks, talked about the future, all while I was scrambling to save their asses. And Harold? He wasn't even in the picture. I don't know if he was busy with his own distractions or if he just didn't care anymore. It didn't matter. It wasn't his company anymore. At least, that's how it felt. When the crisis finally ended, when I managed to patch things together enough to keep the client from pulling the plug, I expected something. A thank you maybe. A simple acknowledgement that I'd just saved their asses. Nothing. Not even an email. Not even a passing comment. I went back to my desk that afternoon, feeling the weight of exhaustion in every bone. The work was done, the threat was averted, but the feeling of being invisible, of being irrelevant, it wasn't something I could shake off. I started to realize something in those long hours, the ones spent alone in the server room, grinding away at the chaos they had caused. This wasn't just about the work anymore. This was personal. They didn't care about me. Not really. I was a tool they used when they needed it. And when the job was done, I was thrown back into the shadows. Dana wasn't just out of reach. She was out of touch. And Elaine? She wasn't just incompetent. She was dangerous. But it wasn't even her fault. She was just a symptom of something bigger, something I hadn't been able to see until now. The writing was on the wall. They didn't need me, not in the way I thought they did. not in the way I thought I needed them. And if I was going to get out of this, it wasn't going to be by saving the system. It was going to be by saving myself. It happened during a client meeting. The room was filled with suits and screens, all blinking with numbers and metrics. Elaine was presenting our new security protocols, the ones I had put together, my adaptive threat grid, the one that had won us the biggest clients. I was sitting at the back, trying to keep my expression neutral, though every word she spoke felt like a slap. And then, without even a hint of hesitation, she said it. This is the adaptive threat grid. It was my idea, my vision, and now it's the cornerstone of our security system. A beat of silence passed. I stood up. I had to. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet, that's not exactly right. Elaine blinked, the faintest flicker of surprise crossing her face, but she recovered quickly. What are you talking about, Rick? I reached into my bag, pulled out my laptop, and connected it to the screen. If we're giving credit, I think it's important to note that this model was built, tested, and implemented by me. I have the commit log to prove it. I typed in the commands, pulling up the time-stamped code comment. The screen lit up with a string of lines, dated and tagged. It wasn't just proof, it was undeniable. Elaine's eyes narrowed. She didn't say a word, but I could see the calculation in her face. She wasn't about to admit she'd taken credit for my work. Not here, not now. Dana was sitting at the front, her gaze fixed firmly on the table, but I saw her shift slightly. Her face went cold, like a switch had been flipped. A flicker of guilt? Regret? I wasn't sure, but I saw it. I saw the divide between us, clearer than I ever had before. Harold didn't even flinch. His eyes narrowed, though, staring me down like I'd just stabbed someone in front of him. His lips were tight, but he didn't say a word. He just sat there, silent. I didn't need his permission. I didn't need their approval anymore. I closed the laptop slowly, standing taller than I had in days. The tension in the room thickened, and I knew everyone could feel it. That's all, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Just wanted to clear that up. I turned and walked out, the silence following me like a storm. 3 days later, the suspension hit. Same room, same audience, the board, the employees, all of them watching me like I was the one who had done something wrong. Harold, standing beside Dana, repeating the same script they had rehearsed. They were doing it publicly now, making sure the entire company knew. I was a problem, an inconvenience, something they had to deal with. But I knew. I knew what this was. It was retaliation. I didn't fight it. I didn't argue. I didn't say a word. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was controlled, empty. The kind of smile you give someone when you've already seen the end of the story. I could feel the weight of their eyes, the judgment, the confusion, but I didn't flinch. Sure, I said. It came out flat, like I was agreeing to something trivial. I grabbed my things, my laptop, my jacket, and walked out. The murmurs of the room started up again, a low buzz of questions and surprise, but I didn't care. I passed by people who wouldn't meet my eyes. I could feel their discomfort, their awkwardness, but I held my head high. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did, and I was fine with that. I didn't drive home after the suspension. Instead, I got in my car and headed out of the city, down to a nondescript building just off a side street. It was only 18 minutes away, but it felt like a lifetime. The building was forgettable, a little gray, a little worn, a place you wouldn't notice unless you knew exactly where it was. Suite 502. That's where I had set up RMG systems, years ago, in the quiet before all of this. It wasn't much, a couple of desks, a server rack, and a corner where I wrote code late into the night. But it was mine. I pulled into the parking lot, my hands still steady on the wheel. The weight of what I was about to do didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt right. I sat in the car for a second before I got out. The building's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, the hum of the AC filling the silence as I made my way up to the office. I let myself in, slid into the worn-out chair, and opened the file. The original co-founder agreement. My eyes went straight to Section 14, subsection C. It had been there, buried in the fine print, and I knew it would come in handy one day. I had written that clause myself, specifically to protect me in a situation like this. In the event of a dispute or removal from active duties, full rights to authored IP revert to Rick Morgan. Harold had never read it. Dana's lawyer had skimmed it, probably on a Friday afternoon. But it was there, binding, and I was the one who'd put it there. I felt something like a smile creeping onto my face. No matter how much they tried to erase me, the truth was written in black and white. I wasn't just going to walk away with nothing. I got to work. It wasn't hard to get into the system. I'd built the infrastructure from the ground up. Over the course of a few hours, I reassigned the authentication servers, swapped out the license structures, and made sure that every piece of IP that Silverback had relied on for years was now in my hands. It was clean, it was legal, but it was also devastating. I finished everything around 11:45 p.m., just in time to make sure the clocks were synced. I sat back for a second, letting the silence settle in. The systems were all in place, the IP reverted. I hadn't taken anything out of spite. I had just taken back what was mine. At 12:01 a.m., the systems at Silverback went down, quietly, without fanfare, no alarms, no loud crashes, just a clean, orderly failure. All of their infrastructure, everything they had built their business on, was suddenly locked, inaccessible. It was like pulling the plug on a machine no one knew was dying. I leaned back in the chair, a deep breath leaving my chest. I hadn't slept in what felt like days, but I wasn't tired. I got up and made coffee, real coffee, not that watered-down office stuff. I took my time with it, savoring the simple routine. I didn't have to rush anymore. After the coffee, I went to bed. I lay there in the dark, letting the quiet of the room wash over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I slept. And I slept like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The ringing phone yanked me awake at 6:45 a.m. My hand fumbled for it on the nightstand, knocking over a coffee mug in the process. I didn't care. I wasn't even fully conscious yet, still half in the dream, when I saw the missed calls. 43. 43. My phone was a battlefield. I scrolled through them quickly. Dana's assistant, the CTO, random numbers I didn't recognize. Everyone. The urgency of the messages hit me even before I listened to them. Rick, everything's offline. We're locked out of every product. Then came the real kicker. We can't get into the servers. The whole system is down. I put the phone down slowly, not even trying to make sense of it yet. I stared at the ceiling, watching the light leak in from the blinds. The chaos, the panic, the mounting calls. I had done that. I had spent all night making sure it was done cleanly, politely, legally. But I didn't feel bad. Not yet. I made coffee, real coffee like the night before. I didn't hurry. It felt good to take my time, to control something. At 8:05 a.m., the call came. It was legal. Margaret, the head of their legal team, her voice calm and professional. Too calm, considering what was happening. "We'd like to meet with you at the headquarters," she said. "We'd like to discuss this, situation." I knew exactly what she meant. I could hear the panic behind her words, but I didn't let it show. "I'll be there," I said, my voice steady. "But as a vendor." The line went quiet for a second, but I could hear her thinking. She didn't argue. She just confirmed the time and hung up. I dressed in silence, moving through the motions. I didn't need to check my appearance. I already knew the power I had now. When I walked into Silverback's headquarters an hour later, the chaos in the air was palpable. Employees were huddled in corners, phones pressed to their ears, and the boardroom door was wide open, full of frantic voices. But none of that mattered. I walked in like I owned the place. The board was gathered at the far end of the room. Harold, Dana, Elaine, the rest of the suits. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. I didn't even sit. I stood there, calm, centered, watching them squirm. "Rick," Harold said, his voice low, trying to hide the edge of panic. "We need to fix this. This isn't just, let's skip the small talk," I interrupted. "You've got a problem, and I'm your solution. But there's a price." I could see their eyes flicker. No one expected me to come in like this. They were used to me being the guy who solved everything, who kept quiet, who did the work. But this time was different. This time, they weren't in control. I laid it out. Each demand clear and non-negotiable. Full ownership of the IP division, I said, my voice firm, and 45% equity in Silverback. Harold removed as CEO. Dana reassigned to operations. And finally, a public apology. You've got 30 days to get it done. The silence in the room was heavy. I could see Dana's eyes narrow. Harold's jaw was clenched so tight, I thought it might break. Elaine? She looked surprised, like she hadn't thought it would go this far. Margaret, who had been sitting silently at the back, didn't hesitate. She picked up her pen, already scribbling notes. We'll have the new terms drafted immediately. The board didn't argue. They couldn't. There was nothing left for them to fight. They had already lost. I stood there, watching as they fumbled through the details, too stunned to ask questions. Harold tried to speak again, but I didn't let him. I turned on my heel and walked out without another word. By the time I left the building, the world had shifted. The board had caved. They'd signed what I wanted. I didn't need anything from them anymore, except to let it all burn down. At 10:13 a.m., security escorted Dana off the executive floor. She didn't say a word. No protests, no pleading. I watched her walk past my new office, her head down, her face ashen. She didn't even glance at me. Part of me wanted to feel something, maybe satisfaction, maybe guilt, but it was just empty. The door closed behind her, and the quiet was almost unbearable. It didn't take long for the next wave to hit. Elaine's patent application was flagged by legal. Apparently, she'd tried to file a claim for one of my designs, trying to pass it off as her own. It wasn't just a breach of trust. It was attempted IP theft. I didn't smile when I heard about it. There was no need. I stayed in my office watching through the glass as the company reorganized. People shuffled in and out, the air thick with tension. The same faces, but now they were avoiding my gaze instead of Dana's. The board was already in motion, cleaning up the mess. They had no choice. Harold signed his resignation 3 days later. It was quiet, no fanfare. The board put out the usual press release about him stepping down for personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The board also installed me as CTO and technical director. The role was mine, officially. No more side glances, no more whispers behind my back. But I didn't feel the need to gloat. That wasn't the point. I had what I wanted, and I was going to build from here, not tear everything apart. I went back to work, quiet, focused, the way I always had. People treated me differently now. They didn't look at me like I was just some developer who happened to be in the room. They saw me for what I was, the one who held it all together. I didn't need their respect. I already knew what I was capable of, but it felt good to see it in their eyes. That night, after everything had settled, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. The city sprawled out before me, the lights twinkling in the distance. I was alone, and I wasn't lonely. I had built this, line by line, clause by clause. From the beginning to the end, it was mine. No one could take it from me anymore. I smiled to myself, and for the first time in a long while, it was real.